First of all, let's tell you how the Naira did yesterday. We're still in a positive mood for the Naira. We see just a gain on NAFEX, 0.20%. The Naira opened at 1,574 Naira 20 kobo, but closed at 1,570 Naira 99 kobo. Of course, the Dutch auction is still on, and we hope it is sustained. But, we still have some unanswered questions about the frequency, the target, and all of that. We hope to hear from the central bank real soon. For NAFEX, it was almost unchanged for the second day. That's what we had yesterday from Friday to Monday. So Monday to Tuesday, also, NAFEX seems to be stabilizing right there. But I can't say the same for the parallel market, which is one of the stories that senior associate with financial derivatives company, Dumebi Oluwale, comes in with. Dumebi, it's been a while since I had you here. I know it's been you and Ladi, so it's good to let's do the girls thing this morning.
I'm happy to do that.
Great. So we see we've been celebrating that the gap between the Naira, the official market and the parallel market has reduced. I wonder if we should be worried again, because we see since last week, since they started the Dutch auction system, we've seen in the official market the Naira gaining, but in the parallel market, which we would say is more accessible, because these are to the banks mostly, the Naira has been dropping. Yesterday too, it also dropped, in spite of the fact that we had an increase or a gain on the official market.
I mean, some of these things are pretty much expected, right? So you can think of it like low supply causing the price to increase, because now demand is being met to end users through the official market. But then again, if you actually look at where the parallel market rate was before the Dutch auction, which is around 1,622, to what it is right now, you actually see, I think it's about 1,600 Naira, 1,600 to 1,605. So you see that's actually also appreciated. So to some extent, the movement of supply from the official market is also somewhat supporting the parallel market, but maybe not as much as what is going on the demand on the official market side. But more importantly, I think, is to look at the dynamics at play in the FX markets right now, and you see that with the reforms that we've taken place, I think when the reforms initially started, I did mention at some point that interventions like this are things that we will see somewhat sparingly, because now we're in a world where the CBN is not expected to intervene subsequently in the market. We're now in a world where it's a willing buyer and willing seller market. So if there's no supply, we'll definitely see the markets react and the prices will go high. But if demand is excess demand and supply is not meeting, we'll also see the exchange rate market react. And when we see backlogs like this, I mean, from the retail auction report or press release that the CBN shared, we saw like there was a backlog of about $1.1 billion, right? So you see that because of how much that backlog was, the CBN had to step in. So in this world, basically, we'll definitely see more things like this, but not subsequently. The CBN would only intervene in manners like when we're seeing like so much backlog and supply of FX
the backlog
is not so much.
Now, but I think the comforting thing is we've seen FX inflow increase, we've seen our reserve increase, so CBN actually has the power, the purchasing power to intervene at this time, even though it shouldn't be, as you said, a normal thing, the intervention. But we need them. Do we need them to intervene with the BDCs, because they've been doing it with the banks?
Yes, I mean, the CBN, they released a circular that they also sold some dollars to BDCs at some point before this retail auction happened.
Okay,
so we're seeing them step in.
We haven't seen them do the Dutch system with.
So I think this is it. We need to also understand like where the BDCs are placed in the FX markets, right? So they definitely supply to myself and you, they supply, So the expectation is that because of how much the backlog was on the commercial banks side, which gives dollars directly to businesses that need it for import, that will now provide the commodities that myself and you. So at that point in time, you realize that the intervention was very necessary for these businesses because of how significant they are to the overall economy. So to meet like smaller FX demand, I think that they're already doing good enough with BDCs, and I definitely still see them engage more in supplying BDCs with dollars. But I think it's also important for us to recognize the fact that what the CBN is doing in this position that we are now, and I think I said last time I was here with Ladi, the CBN is doing what it can and what it should in this current climate that we're in. Nigeria has taken up so much reforms that are definitely, hitting people on the side, but it's not one way, right? We do have two parties involved that are running this economy.
I hear you calling out the fiscal authority.
And I'm doing it very boldly today because we cannot sideline the effort that the CBN is taking up, right? And they can only do so much. They only have so much levers to pull. Interest rates and interventions when necessary, right, to ensure that prices are stable. We've seen them take these steps, and it's painfully so, right? And so we definitely need more support to what they are doing from the fiscal side. If not, we'll just keep, dancing around in circles.
If we have this conversation, I would have pushed you to the fiscal side, so you tell us. But let's talk about oil production. We saw a bit of that good news, about 30 barrels per day increase in our production. Certainly good news for us. We hope it's sustained. But can we expect this to trickle down to the local refiners? There's been a lot of issue around that, and Dangote being a giant in the industry, because I know that I've been talking to modular refiners, and they've been complaining, but their voice haven't been heard. It's too low, but Dangote is a giant, so we've been hearing, and it seems it's now that the problem is receiving attention. Can we expect that, for instance, this 2.3% increase in crude maybe will be channeled to them, because they're even asking for more now? And Port Harcourt refinery is coming up. It's supposed to also be a part of domestic crude consumption.
I can't say if this 2.34% will trickle down to Dangote or even the modular refineries. But what I will say is we are now at that point where we cannot do without producing to supply these refineries. We are at the point where Nigeria has become too exposed to global shocks. And if we're not producing enough, we can't even supply our own refineries. Talk more of, thinking of exporting as much, right? So we're at that point where we need to have these conversations, and not just only have the conversations. I think the time for execution and implementation it was since yesterday, right? Or some decade ago. So it's time for us to actually start doing these things and making sure that we are able to refine our own crude and then supply the domestic market, so that the reforms that we've taken, we'll begin to see them actually have the broad-based impact on the economy. Because from an economy standpoint, what you believe, or not what we believe, from numbers and what we have on our expectations, and this is even cutting across other economic agents, right? The expectation is that because we are producing oil, right, we do have functioning refineries. They are not just getting crude and they're not refining as much as they should. We have this somewhat infrastructure in place, and we also have a Dangote. Let us produce enough, sell to them. Right. Let us refine and supply to ourselves.
So the problem maybe is we have obligations, and even the NUPRC had come out to say they can't even meet up with what the PIA has allocated to domestic refiners because of our obligations. We have loans that are backed by crude. So that puts us in a very tight corner.
It does, and that's why we need to address the issues that are making us not produce enough. Because when you think about where Nigeria was in terms of crude oil production, some 20 years ago or some 10 years ago, we were producing up to 2 million barrels per day. And because of that, when you even look at our budgets, right, you see that the government did have the confidence to put an oil production estimate of about 1.8 million barrels per day, 1.7, 1.6, before we started, reducing it, just cutting it down. So what does this tell you? It means we do have that capacity, right? But we're not just doing what we should do to produce that capacity or produce at our optimum capacity. And it's very simple. What is making you not producing up? There's theft, there's vandalism.
But there's a whole lot of effort on dealing with oil theft. You see the Navy, they've arrested, they catch vessels.
So what this means is that we're not doing enough. It's just that simple. We're not doing enough. And when we understand how critical this resource is to our economy, we need to deploy more. If we're deploying one tank of the Navy, and 10 troops of the army, we need to do a lot more. Simply because right now we cannot shy away from the fact that our economy is still extremely dependent on this commodity and the effects we get from it, the earnings we get from it. We're still very susceptible to it. Export earning, I think from the Q1 foreign trade report, Nigeria's exports is still it's still, I think crude oil still accounts for over 70% of that. Yes. So we cannot avoid the conversation of how Nigeria
totally green.
Exactly. We can't go totally.
Let me ask, because I don't know if you saw the news. I think it was last week or so, where they went to, was it Akwa Ibom State or River State, and illegal refinery sites and things like that. And people ask, isn't it possible to legalize those areas so that we can capture some of those inputs into the legal system?
I mean, I'm not an oil expert, so I would only speak from an economic standpoint. And I do think that it's a conversation that can be had, right? I don't know how effective that would be, but if these illegal refineries are already refining and are already, to some extent, instead of maybe destroying the infrastructure that is already there, there is a world where we could absorb some of those resources and maybe make them legal. But then again, there are also consequences, right? So I do think that right now with some of these oil production issues that we found ourselves in, there's not enough consequence for some of these things. And it's, even if there are consequences, it's not publicly made. So that's why I think to an extent some of these refineries have still been bold enough to continue. So there's that world where we need to just clean up and sanitize the entire oil production sector for Nigeria to optimally produce.
All right, we're almost out of time, but maybe I think we have a bit of good news. And people say, oh, journalists, they feast on the bad news. Tomatoes, pepper, we see the price has tapered a bit. We don't know for how long, but it's worth mentioning.
Of course, it's a good thing. I, for one, I'm happy about it.
I know your freezer is stocked at this time. You don't want to say.
Oh my.
Let's not go there.
But I mean, it's definitely good news, right? And even though it's not so much that people are not still equipped to so much income to bulk buy as much, but it's definitely some relief on people's incomes. And one of the reasons why this is happening, we can definitely attribute it to, I think, to the harvest season as well. To the harvest season, there's also some level of little respite when it comes to logistics costs actually towards the wholesale markets and also the retail market. Then you also consider the fact that I think the federal government, has been quite supportive. I know that from the time of the protest, they released some bags of rice, and so we're also seeing that. We're also seeing some increased activities from like the borders that were reopened earlier in the year. And also the import duty suspension as well that has already started kicking in. So we're seeing like positive impacts from there. And when you net it off to look at how long that import duty suspension would last, and the federal government, supportive measures in terms of food, we do expect that at least for up until the end of the third quarter of the year, some of these commodities we might be able to see like this price decline sustain.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, for Gary, I mean, I think Mr. Rwani did say the other day, so it's the perishables because of the fear of sustained storage. And
exactly.
So we see, okay, cement is down, that's good news. Tomatoes and pepper have gone down also. But when it comes to the dry commodities, Gary, rice, flour, they're still going up because obviously they can be preserved.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Senior Associate Financial Derivatives Company, Jimmy Bioluwadi.
Thank you.